Hi, I'm Peter Ryan, a mechanical engineering lecturer at Dundalk Institute of Technology. And this series is on an introduction to 3D printing. This particular video is the third in the series and it's on an overview to the slicing software. Okay? So the slicing software is a software that takes the file that we generated in our 3D CAD package. So you saw in the video earlier, we created our blade model in SolidWorks, for example. We then saved that in an output that was acceptable for our slicing software, which in this case was an STL or .stl format. So the actual slicing software we're going to use is called Ultimaker Cura. And this is a free open source piece of software. Okay, so it will look like this. Okay, so how you get this is if you go onto the internet and you just do a search for Ultimaker Cura, okay, and follow the link that comes up, or the first search, usually the first or second search. So you should be going to the Ultimaker website, and within there you're looking for software. And there's a download there for free. Okay. You should see the version up here. Okay, it's usually the newest stable version that is there. There is a beta version, but there can be bugs and issues with that. So I would just go for whatever one is here. Okay, so once this actually does get a new update, when you open up your software, it will actually tell you there's a new version and ask you if you want to change to that. So just download this one. It'll take a while for the file to download. I think it's a zip folder, and then just go through the setup through that. Okay, so once you've that done, the first time you open up Cura, you'll get a few things that you'll have to click. You can just skip through most, and they're about setting up accounts. You don't need an account. So, you can skip most of that and you can come back to anything that you need. So that will bring you to a screen like this. And what you can see in here is my actual printer setup. Right, my printer, this is the print bed. So you'll see in the workshop or on your own 3D printer that you will have some kind of metal or glass plate here for printing on. And that's what's represented here. Okay, so the first step you're going to have to do is you're going to have to go up here. You may not have a printer here, so you will have to go up to this and just go add printer. You probably won't have any of these. I forget, I think maybe the Ultimaker 3 is in there as a default, but if you don't, you just go up, add a printer, and you'll need to add whatever printer you have. Right? If you're in DKIT, in the mechanical and electronic engineering department, we have a number of 3D printers that I would recommend that you add. Right, so the first one is the Ultimaker 3 Extended. So I already have this, but if I click add here, it should give me a menu. Okay. No, so it hasn't. It has just created a second version of the Ultimaker 2. Right, so for you, that will just be, that'll be the first one. You won't have the other one. So I'm going to go and try and just maybe delete that one so it doesn't confuse my system when I'm doing something with it. So I should be able to remove this then, like so. You won't need to do this. Okay, so that is gone. So again, you're going to go up and add a printer. So once you have the Ultimaker 3 Extended, the other printers we have in DKT in the workshop are Creality machines, right, and Anycubic machines. So Anycubic is here. So the Anycubic we have is an Anycubic Mega SE. So you won't see that on the list. So this is a good example. The closest printer to that is an Anycubic Mega Zero. Right? It's the same printer, but this one didn't have a heated bed. So when we go up here, if we go add, and again, I'm not sure, sometimes it brings up a menu, sometimes I have to go in and manually open the menu. So let's say we want to go to this printer. We go down to manage printers, pick the one we want to change. So you'll have one Anycubic Mega Zero. I have two because I added it already. And we go into machine settings. And you just have to click heated bed. And you can ignore everything else. Everything else it's the same printer. You don't have to worry about any of the other things. So by doing that, I've changed this Anycubic Mega 02 into an Anycubic Mega SE, which is the printers we have, 10 of them in the workshop. Okay, it may let me rename this, so let's rename that to Anycubic Mega SE, and that's my SE printer connected there. Okay, so you will need to do that for the other printers in the college. So the other one is we have the CR10, so they are the big ones. There's three big printers. There's slightly different models after that, but the CR10 covers them all. There is a CR20 as well, and then there's a Creality Ender 3. So again, you would add all of those by going up here and going to add printer, non-networked, and finding a Creality. So you have to go down to C. Oh, didn't like that. So down to Creality 3D, and that CR10 we have, right? That's the one we have. We've 3 of those. We also have a CR20, and we have a CR or a Creality Ender 3. Okay, so they are the printers we have, and any files we create in this software will only work on the printer we create them for. Right? They may work on the other printers sometimes, but it's not a good idea because the coordinates and all the settings might be different, so you could cause damage. So in general, you should create the file specifically for the printer you're going to print on. So you'll need to add all of those printers, and from time to time, depending on which ones are busy, you may need to print on a different printer. So this is my virtual print bed, if you like. So I'm going to bring in something just so we can do a demo on it. It doesn't really matter, but I suppose we'll go to the one we created, which was the OWC blade. So let's bring that in. Okay. This is a good example because it actually brings it in the wrong kind of orientation. So when you've created it in CAD, you'll have, created your sketches on whatever plane, right? So whatever coordinate system you've created on will bring it in like that. So sometimes, it'll come in an orientation that isn't the most suitable way for it to print. So it doesn't really matter how you model it, what axis or orientation you model it in, we can change it in this. So the first thing is when we click on this part, right? So when we click on that, you'll see a blue outline, and that then means this menu here becomes live. Okay, so you can pick various different things in here, and I'll show you that. But when I brought this in here, it turned yellow. Right, so just to show you, if I bring that outside the print area or partially outside it, it turns to gray and yellow, or 2 shades of gray. So that's just telling me that it cannot print that model. It goes outside the print volume, and each printer will have its own print volume. Okay, so when I bring it back in, it goes yellow. So yellow means it can print that it's within the print volume. Okay, the next color to look at there, I guess, is the red. So the red is telling me that this surface here is hanging over too much. Right, so the angle is too steep here, and you'll be trying to print this in thin air. So it's telling me essentially that piece will need support if I want to print it in this orientation, which I don't. And this one here, again, it's at too steep an angle, and if it tries to print that, it will just fall off into thin air. So you can watch out for that a little bit later on once we've set up our angle, but that's what those colors mean. Okay, so we're not going to scale it just yet. So this axis here is the movement. So it's telling me where the center point is. So if I set that to 0, and I set this one to 0, it positions it into the middle of the bed. Okay. So something just to be aware of when you bring in these parts is 0, 0, 0 on the X, Y, and Z for positioning your part in Cura is the center of the bed. But when you're creating your code for the printer, this is the 0 point, the origin. So for all print instructions, this is the origin. But just for the position on the computer, for these axes, for moving this, it's here in the center. Okay, but the coordinate system used for all of the Gcode and all of the printer instructions is here. So just be careful of that. Okay, the red is your x-axis, right? So across this way. So when you're looking at your printer, your Mega Zeros or whatever printer you have, this will be looking in from the front. So left to right is your x-axis, front to back is your y-axis, and up and down then is your blue axis. Okay. So I've set all those to 0 for positioning, so that's the way we want it. I'm moving this screen, by the way, by middle clicking on the mouse wheel, pans it. So if I click on the mouse wheel and drag it, it moves it around like that. If I click on the right mouse button and then move the mouse around, it rotates it. Okay. If I zoom in and out on the wheel, or if I move in and out on the wheel, it zooms. And then if I left click, that selects this part. Okay, and moving it then just moves that. I don't think pressing the left key out here does anything. It doesn't. Okay, it just deselects the part. So as soon as I've deselected the part, this menu goes grey. So you need to be selected on the part you want to change. So the next thing I can do is I can scale this. So this is at 100% scale. If I move this to 200, right, the part is now too big to print. So it's telling me that by changing color. So if I go back to where I was, 100. Okay. When I change one of these, they all change. So it scales the part up in proportion. If I don't want to do that, I can turn off uniform scaling. And now when I change the Y, let's say to 200, only the Y will change. Right? So the blade length changes without the rest of it. So again, I need to reset that and then lock on the uniform scaling. And now I'm back to when I change it. And I can change it by dragging these as well. So again, it all changes in proportion. And you'll notice when I shrunk that, it comes up off the bed and it snaps back down onto the bed. So that's important as well. And I'm going to reset that back to 100. The next thing over here is to rotate the part. And there are a few ways again. So I can click on the red one to rotate it. And it rotates in 15-degree increments. Okay, so you see there it has snapped to 90. If you want to turn off that, you can click off the snap rotation and then you can move it in 1-degree increments or whatever you like. But I usually leave it on the snap one. And again, you can move it in the different ways. Okay. Another thing you can do is you can tell the software to lay it flat, and for some square parts or rectangular parts this might work. For this part, I think if I press this, it's not necessarily going to work. Okay, it's okay. You could print it that way. In fact, yeah, you could, but I suppose it's overhanging this way a little bit, so I'll probably adjust that. So I'm going to put that back the way it was. Right. You can also do it by clicking on this and then clicking the surface that you want to be horizontal, right, or you want to be on the bed. It's not going to really work well with this because it's a curved. So I'll just move this back in here. Okay, so now that's pretty much the way it was. But I don't want any of those. I want it to be vertical. So I'm just going to go back to the rotation one and I'm going to return it to the way it was by pressing this one. And then I'm going to manually rotate it about the red axis to 90 degrees. Okay, and now I'll show you the way that is printing. So this back surface is kind of straight. Doesn't make any difference. It's just I've printed this before and I know it works well on that one. Okay, it'll be easier to see on your parts because they'll have a base. So the next thing you'll want to do sometimes is you'll want to create a mirror. So you can create a mirror image of these parts. It's not going to matter too much on this one because it's symmetrical, but you can mirror around that. You can mirror vertical or horizontal, left or right. You have the option. It doesn't create a copy though. It changes the part that you're actually doing. All right. So if you wanted to create two of them, you'd have to copy it first and then mirror the copy. And I can show you how to do that in a second. So I think that's, for me, that's back the way it was. So down here, don't worry about that. We'll cover that at some other point. That's to turn off some support. So when that's for actually, that's to section a model. We're not going to be using that. This one is to turn off certain parts of support. So if you want some of the support to work, but it's printing support in areas you don't want it, you can draw a cube in here and that'll turn off any supports within that volume. But again, you won't really need that. Okay. Worst case scenario, you'll just waste some material by printing support you don't necessarily need. So we'll ignore that one for now. You don't really need it. Okay. So the next thing I guess that you might want to do, oh, so I forgot to turn off that. So that's the cube I was talking about. If I click that now, I can delete it. So it wouldn't print any support that would be in there now, but we don't want that. So I click on my part again, and if I go up here to edit, I can do some stuff up here as well. So I can multiply selected, right? And I can add one copy. So whatever number is in here, it adds to the build plate. So it's going to create one copy. Okay, and you could do that a number of times. Again, if you wanted to print a mirror image and a standard part, you would do the copy, and now you could create your mirror image here. So I'm still on the blocker. So I just need to delete that. Okay, so you need to click off of this onto something else, scale or size. Otherwise, every time you click something, you get that little cube. So that's my copy. And again, I could create a mirror image here if I wanted to. So I could print two together like that. And if I don't want that, I think I can just delete the selected here. Again, I can do it this way by just hitting delete, or I can go up to the menu and go delete selected. There isn't anything else you'll need immediately in there. You can clear your build plate. That'll take all, if you have a lot of different things on the build plate together, that's the quickest way of deleting everything. You can reset all positions if you want to go back to the positions that the parts came in. That takes you back to the reset position. This undoes any transformations that you've done. So if you've scaled your part and you forget what you've done, or you've lost track, you can just go back to reset all of this. So again, you won't generally need those. So I'm going to go back to that. View, so camera position, camera view, right? Perspective, or they'll give you a slightly different views. You needn't worry about that too much. And there are a few other ones in here, right? Settings we'll do somewhere else. Don't worry about that. Extensions, so you can add some plugins or add-ons to your Cura when you get it first on your laptop. So Thingy Browser or Parts for Calibration, they're two I added. So with this one, I can add a calibration cube just to make sure the printer is printing the right, dimensions. So I can add that by clicking there, and it should print a little cube here for me. Okay, this is taking quite a while because this blade that we created, I did a fine mesh on the STL. Okay, so we can actually delete that blade now, and we'll use the calibration cube as our part because it's a bit smaller, it'll be quicker to slice. Okay, so that's my calibration cube. So if you want to add those extensions, the way you would do that is go up to Marketplace and just type in calibration here. And calibration shapes, there's probably a few different ones, and you go install. I have it installed already. So when you press install on this, so if I just do this one, I won't use this, but when I press install, it's probably going to force, if I press accept here, it's going to force me to restart. So I'm going to decline that, right? But that's how you would do it. The ones I recommend are calibration shapes to make sure your printer is working right before you don't want to start a 10-hour print to discover that the printer's not working. So this part prints in 30 minutes. It's a good way of checking that everything is working for you. So I often use those calibration ones. There's quite a few of them in there for calibrating for temperature, size, different materials. Right? You'll probably just use the cube. Right. So the next thing you'll need to look at is actually some print options or some options in here. So this is the default menu, and when you'll probably get this menu when you see it. So resolution, that's the number of slices per millimeter, the number of layers. And I can visualize that by going up here to preview. Yeah, and once I click preview, now I can see the actual layers. Okay. So, and I can scroll down here on this bar and I can look at each layer individually. Right, so that's my first layer, my second layer. Right, so it prints a solid 3 layers there on the bottom, and it's printing 2 walls. Right, the outside wall is in red, the inside wall is in green, and it's printing 2 walls all up along with a kind of a mesh or an infill here to save material. So you don't need this part to be solid the whole way through, and you can set what percentage infill. So if I set that to 60% or 60 something percent, and I'll show it to you. So you can see it's much finer. I would usually print somewhere between 10 and 20. Okay, so adding infill rather than leaving it empty helps with strength, but it also helps with the roof. So if we go up to the top, you will see that it's going to print a roof on top of this, or a top skin if you like. And if you don't have an infill in there, then that top surface is just going to struggle. It's going to collapse or warp. So you can actually see that Z there isn't going to print properly because it has nothing to print on, right? So the bottom layer that may just collapse. So you would need a finer mesh than that to hold up that top piece. And again, when you print this calibration, you'll find out. So that probably will print. You could go a bit finer again. There's probably, the percentage is fine. We could go with a different shape would help that. Okay, but that's probably going to be fine. Add a few extra layers. So I think I have 4 or 5 top layers there. And that's because the first layer probably won't be great. And then, you know, it adds, as you add layers, it'll get a little bit better. So you want quite a few layers on top if you have a very small infill. So that's the infill setting. This is the number of layers per millimeter. So normal would be kind of 0.2 of a millimeter. This is 0.1 or 1/10 of a millimeter. So now you're going to see it's going to create, for every 1 layer that I had before, it'll create 2 layers, right? So it will roughly double my print time, right? Instead of having 100 layers, I now have 200 for this part. Okay, so that will take nearly twice as long to print. If you're printing something with very fine details, you might need 0.1, but the likes of this part here where it's almost, you know, the same cross section the whole way up, 0.2 is perfect. You might even get away with let's say 3. Now the thing to watch with this is that the nozzle on our 3D printers in DKT are all 0.4 of a millimeter. So the highest layer we can go will be a function of that. So if we go to 0.3 of a millimeter, that's 3/4 of our nozzle size, and that's a limit. Right? The printer should print that. It might struggle on the first layer, so normally what I would do is make the first layer a little bit thinner and then alter it that way. So usually keep it under 3/4 of your nozzle size, 0.4 for all our printers. We can change that, but the printers in DKT are all 0.4 for now. And the other one in here is support. So for us, this is not going to need support because it's laying flat on the ground. If I add support to a part, again, you can click that and it will add support to the part. This may not print. Yeah, so it's tried to support there. Again, that support is not going to be useful. The support blocker will come in useful here. So you can see this support material here is doing nothing. So I would just draw my block around that and that would block out that support. And it wouldn't, you know, because that might, what it'll try to do is try to print that and it'll just get stuck to the side of the print. So we don't need support. Adhesion is another thing we can click on here. Let me just center that. So if I press adhesion here, it's going to, I don't know, will it do 1 or will it give me options? So it has added on these kind of rings of lines of filament all around the block, and that will help it stick to the bed. When you take off the part, you'll have to cut these off or peel them off, right? There are a few other options for adhesion to help you stick. The default one is the skirt, which you saw already, which was just a ring on the outside but not attached. Okay, and there's another one which you'll sometimes see people printing, is the raft, where it prints an entire layer on the ground and then prints the part on top of it. So that's the basic settings, and that's what you're going to see. But what I recommend when you open up Cura first, okay, but what I recommend you would do is that you change to a custom and you pick the settings, you know, more detailed settings. So now you have a full list here, and I would recommend that you configure this to suit what you're printing. But for now, this will print this part, okay? And down here, every time I've changed these settings, mine has been automatically slicing. What you will have is you may have to press slice here manually, and sometimes that's the way. So if I press this pause button, now it will give me, if I change this, I just need to change something, it doesn't matter what it is. Now it's telling me to slice, so I have to hit slice manually. So yours, well, you'll probably have to hit slice manually on yours, you won't have this pause or slice automatic slicing button here. That is an add-on. So you could go up here and I forget, is it called slice automatic slicing toggle. So if you install that add-on, you will then have the same system as me. So this is quite handy where you want to turn off automatic slicing if a part is too slow. So if a part is quite a fine mesh like that blade we created, you might turn this off while you're getting set up, because you don't want it hanging up on the computer every time you're changing settings as you're going through the list. So you can turn it off and then turn it back on towards the end. So I can just hit save to disk there. And this will save, you know, if I go back out to my desktop, we can just call this cube part or something like that. And it's now changing that as a G-code, right? And that's the instructions for the printer. So if I hit save, I can now print that part, okay? But to get set up on the DKIT printers, because they are cheaper printers, except the Ultimaker Cura or the Ultimaker 3, you probably can just use this and hit print. So change your printer up here, go back to prepare. Change this to the Ultimaker 3. Where is it? Is it gone? Oh, down at the bottom. So Ultimaker 3 Extended again is the printer we have in DKT, the Ultimaker one. So now, you know, you can probably use the default functions. You will need to make sure that the material you have set up is correct. So I skipped that section on the one we were doing a second ago. So the SE, if I go back, it'll usually be set up with PLA, but you can change your material up here. So we only have one extruder on these, so it'll just be one option, change to whatever material. So for us, it's just generic PLA. So generic and PLA down here, that's the material. You can talk to the technicians in the office if you need other material. Those printers can also print PETG, which is a little bit tougher, but it is also tougher to print with. Okay, and we do have printers in the college that can print with ABS, but again, it needs an enclosure for that. So the materials we can easily print with are PLA and PETG. Okay, flexible parts can be printed with TPU, but not on those printers. Okay, so you'll need to talk to me if you need to use those. So we're just going to leave this as PLA for now. Right, so now I'm going to show you how to just set this menu up a little bit better for yourself. So there are a few different options. When you go over from recommended to kind of custom, I think this will show you basic settings here. So basic will be selected. You can pick advanced, you can pick expert, or you can turn on all. So all this is the visibility, right, of each setting. So there are lots of settings that will be changed from the default ones. For example, it might be set for, you know, to print the bottom layers different than the top layers somewhere in here. So, but it won't show you that if you're set to the basic. You won't see the difference. But if you were to watch the printer printing, you would see it do things differently. So usually what I'll turn on is the expert or just all, and I look at everything that I need, right? But I suppose start with the basics one, and I'll show you how to add what you might use. So on quality, we have layer height, and that's fine, 0.2. I would recommend maybe that if you change this, that you always leave the bottom layer as 0.22 or 0.28, something a little bit bigger than 0.2. I would say maybe 0.25. So how we'll do that is we'll go up here and we'll click on the settings, and we're going to turn on we're going to turn on the visible layer initial layer height. Okay, there are a lot of other options here you can see, but you won't need those for now, so we'll exit out. And now that initial layer height, I can set that to be 0.25. So this means that even if I change this to 0.1, right, so for printing fine material, if you try and print the bottom layer at 0.1, you're going to find that you may have issues with the print surface. The extruder might be too close to the print head may be too close to the bed. So I would leave this at 0.25 or 0.2 even, whatever you set it to. Try a few things, depending on the printer, the way it's set up, but usually 0.22 works. And I would just change this. Again, especially if you're printing at 0.3, if you try and print the bottom layer at 0.3, you'll find it'll be too far, it won't stick properly. So for now, we'll leave that at 0.2 as well. So we've added our initial layer height, and that's all we really need to worry about in quality for your basic printing. The walls, right, wall thickness, we can set it by 0.8 or we can do a wall count, right? So just to show you again, the wall is here, right? The inner wall is shown in green and the outer wall is shown in red. So if I add a third wall, you should see the difference. Again, it's slicing automatically. So now you can see 2 inner green walls and 1 red. So it depends how strong you want the part. If it's some kind of bracket you're making, you want at least 3 layers. These are only 0.4 of a mil wide. So even those 3 layers is only 1.2 millimeters. Right? So again, think about what you're doing with it. Okay? And that's all we really need in here for that. Okay? Top and bottom. So these are your very bottom layers. So this, this bottom skin in yellow. So those bottom layers that are different than the rest, and then the very top layers that are different than the rest with the infill. So you can again change how many layers. Bottom, you'll probably get away with 3 unless you need strength. Top, you want 4 or 5, especially if you're going with a mesh that's quite coarse. So for bigger parts, the roof will kind of sag if you don't use at least 4. So again, you can try, but this again is only 4 layers at 0.2 of a millimeter if that's your layer height. So even 5 of these is only a millimeter, right? So I would go with 5 top layers, and I don't think you need to change anything else there. Again, and there's nothing we need to add there. We can go up and just check what options are there if you want to check. No, we don't need any of those. Okay. So infill percentage, right? Infill density. We can change our pattern. So lines works quite well. Okay, so you see that has changed the look of it a little bit. So what it now does is each layer it prints only in one direction, and then it changes that direction every time. So this time on this layer it's only printing these ones. Right? And then the next layer it'll print diagonally 90 degrees across from those, right? So you get a good strong bond without too much material. So I often use lines instead of the grid pattern. Okay, 20% again is probably fine there. So you don't need to do anything on this, but we can look at what other options there are there by clicking that button. And there is a few in there. You don't need any of those, I don't think. No. There's a few settings in there, you don't need them. Okay. Not for your first few prints. So material. Now, these ones you are going to need to set. So 200 degrees is kind of default temperature for this PLA. And that will work fine in the printers in the college with the PLA generally. You can look at the material rolls and see what temperature it recommends, but it's usually a wide band, 180 to 200 and something. So generally I will print at 200, right? If you print too cold, it's not going to print great, your quality won't be great, and the part strength will be very low. If you print too hot, your part strength will be very good, but the details will start to get smudged and it will look terrible. So 200 is usually a good starting point. And just watch how it, again, do a test print and see what it does. Okay, that's the temperature of the head that melts, the print head that melts the PLA or the plastic. This is the bed temperature. So having the printed bed, the glass or the metal, whatever it is, heated helps the part stick to it. And then when you cool down the bed after printing, it releases the part. Okay, especially on the glass beds. So usually what I will do is this will be 50 to 70. So I usually start at 60, and again I start this at 200. But what's quite useful in here is to go in here and turn on some extra settings that you can see. Right? We don't need a lot of these, but print temperature initial layer, we will do that. And we'll go with build plate initial layer. So we can do the first layer at different temperatures. So this is where I would set my build temperature initial layer a little bit hotter. So I would set this one maybe to 65, let's say, and set this one maybe to 55. Okay, if you're doing this at home, the hotter you have your heat bed for a long print, the more energy you use, right? The more electricity. So, you know, having that bed as cool as possible and still get good prints is useful to save your electricity. So you may even get away with 50 there, okay? But 65 will help the print at the start, okay? And again, under the same thinking, I usually turn the initial temperature of the filament up to 210 or 215. Don't exceed the maximum temperature of the filament, but go a little bit higher than what you're printing normally. Now for PLA, that's as hot as you should need. If you're printing with PETG, the temperature you usually print might be very close to kind of 240. So the hottest temperature you can print on those printers is 250. If you print any hotter, you'll melt the plastic tubing that carries the filament. So, you know, if you're printing at 240 there, don't go to 255 here. It'll melt the printer tubing. So, you know, keep in mind that 250 is often the top temperature, and you should check with the printer to, you know, the documents, the specification to see what that is. So for PLA, 200 and 215 for the first layer, and 55 and then 65 for the first layer for the bed temperature. And then the speeds, again, you can just set a print speed of 40, but it will print other things in here. It will print faster or slower than that, but you just can't see them. So we turn on the visibility, you will see that it will print other things. So we look at the infill speed, the wall speed, both outer wall and inner wall. That's important for your print quality. The top surface skin speed, the top bottom skin or speed, support speed might be important. Infill speed, did I already click that? I did. Okay, so I think that's probably enough, but there's an initial layer speed as well. Sometimes if you're having problems with the print sticking, especially with PTG, you need to slow down that first layer. And there's lots of other things in there. There's travel speed as well, which I will just turn on so you can see it. So the print speed is 40. It's printing the infill at 40. It's printing the wall at 20. The outer wall at 20. The inner wall at 40. The top bottom. So this is for the anycubic. You can go a fair bit faster than these. So infill you can do at 60. You can do wall speed, outer wall speed, I would say at maybe 30. You can do your inner wall speed at 40 is fine. Actually, I probably should have just changed this to 70 first, and that will change some other things. Inner wall speed we want to do at, what did I say? So if we do our outer at 30, we can do our inner at 45. Yeah, I'm just picking values that I know are ballpark. You know, you can go with the defaults if you want. You'll find the values that are on the Ultimaker are quite good. So you can go to the Ultimaker up here, go back to prepare, select the Ultimaker, look at what values are in here, and then copy those over. And the travel speed then, so it travels while it's not printing at 100 millimeters per second. So, and again, you can slow down your bottom layer if you want to. So you probably don't need all of those settings, but you know, if you're not getting great quality or if it's printing very slowly, you can change these settings and it'll print faster. So it's now printing that in 28 minutes. If I turn back everything, it was probably printing it a little bit slower. Yeah, so 34 minutes doesn't make a lot of difference in this part. Okay. Travel, don't need to worry about those for now. Support, again, your part might need support and you can turn on support and it'll ask you, do you want it everywhere? You can put it everywhere, it'll put support wherever it needs it. If you put touching build plate, it will only put support from where a part is hanging over the build plate. So it's not going to try and put support in here now because it can't reach the build plate straight down. So if I go back to preview, it's trying to pick up, it's because this part here is extruding out or something. And I'm not sure why it's doing that. It shouldn't do that. Okay. So if we turn back on everywhere, you will see that there should, hopefully, some extra support should arrive in here. It should look a little bit different. So you've seen now it's tried to print in here. Okay. So we'll turn all that off. But you can pick the overhang angle again. The steeper you set that, the less support you'll get. But your parts may not be great quality if you don't support them where they need it. And then the build plate adhesion. We have skirt turned on. We can turn on a brim, which is what we had earlier, or we can turn on the raft, and I'll show you what the raft looks like. I think most of the computers, most of the people who print inside in DKT print on the raft because it allows for the bed not being perfectly leveled. Right, they're good thick layers. You'll get a lot of adhesion. Right, so it prints this raft with thick layers, and then it prints this first layer of the cube, but it prints it a little bit away from the raft so that it doesn't form a proper good bond. So you see it leaves a kind of a layer blank. Right, so it'll still drop down to it because it's only a 0.2 of a mil, but it won't form a good bond. So that you don't need that for everything, but it can be useful for some prints. For this cube, a skirt is fine. So what the skirt does is, even though it doesn't help the part stick, I suppose, because it's not attached to it, what it does is clears the print nozzle so that you have already primed it and it's printing material. Otherwise it starts printing this and you end up with gaps where there's no material coming out at the very start. So that's a quick kind of whistle stop tour of all of these settings. You can avoid turning them on all manually by going to expert or all, and then you can see everything, but you'll probably get a little bit lost. So the ones I have said there are the ones you shouldn't really need to do anything else unless you're trying to print a very complicated part or with a more complicated material. So the last thing I suppose is down here. I've been showing you that it took 34 minutes for this part to print, but it also tells me 4 grams of filament or 1.48 meters of filament roll. Okay, so that's Cura. That's all the settings. I suppose there's one more setting I could show you, and that would be if we were to change our print nozzle or our print settings. So we can go in here to manage printers, machine settings after picking our printer, and if I go to extruder, now I can see that my printer is at 0.4. So for all the DKT printers, they're 0.4, but you can swap out the nozzles. If you have a very big part to print, you could put in a 0.8 nozzle here, and that would mean that each layer can print wider, but it can also print higher because we can go up to 3/4 of that. So if we change that to 0.8, we can print layers that are 0.6 high. So we can print much faster. And it will print every layer twice as fast as well, right? Because it's twice the width of a filament. The filament we buy for those printers, for all of the Creality printers, and the Anycubic, it's 1.75 millimeters. So you'll see those rolls around the college. The Ultimaker 3 has just under, I think it's 2.85, it's just under 3 mil. So you need to make sure you use the right material. So by selecting this in here as 0.4, when we went back out here, we had certain options in here. So it assumes we are printing with a 0.4. So you can't just change the nozzle. You would have to go back in and change that setting back to the new nozzle, and then you get new settings in here. So I can save this now. I've already saved it, but I can save a Gcode. Okay, so that will save the Gcode to the desktop for me. Right, you can save it straight to a USB and then take it to your printer, or you can save it to your computer and then copy it over to the USB for the printer or the SD card, whatever way the printer works. You also sometimes want to save these projects. Right, so that just saves the Gcode. You can't edit it. So if you want to be able to save the actual settings you use, you can go save project. Right, and this is actually a good way of sharing your settings. So what I will do is, for my students, I will set up a folder and I will copy over a file for each printer, say with this part in it. And if you open that then as a file if you open that as a project within Cura, you'll have all my settings here automatically. Right, so it's quite handy that way for sharing settings from one computer to another. So if I save this now, it'll save that to wherever. I didn't look, it's still calling it the same thing. But notice it's saving it as a 3MF file. So that's a project file. Right, and I can open those files again just to show you. Oh, it's taking a second. So if I go up here and open file, and I can pick the one I had here. So not the Gcode file. It should be a .3mf file. Okay, maybe it comes in as a 3D object. Let me open. I'll know in a second if it's the right file type. Yeah, so open as project or import the STL. So this will just bring in the STL. This will bring in the file that I have just set up and all these settings. So if I share this with you and then you go open project, you won't have to manually add the printer. You won't have to do all of this. It'll all be done for you. So it's a good way of sharing settings from one person to another as well. And again, like I said, I will set up a folder for this. So if I open project, it's just going to open the same thing. It tells me a little bit about the parameters. I think it'll let me pick the printers, the two, because I can open it on either of my Anycubic printers, but open it on the one that we set it for. Okay, so you just hit open and it'll open that same file again. I think that's everything. The only other window that I haven't explained was this monitor one, but you don't need to do that. You can monitor the 3D printing, but again, only if you're connected directly to the printer. In DKIT and usually at home, you'll just use an SD card or an USB to transfer your files. So that's everything I can think of as an overview for Cura. Again, this is Cura 5.1.1. There is a newer beta version and there are older versions, but this is the one that I use and this is the one that's in the college computers in the CNC lab. Okay, so thanks very much for your time.